Hello, everyone. Welcome back. So we are on our final and home stretch here with Navaratri. We have arrived at day 8, and we've gone through quite a journey so far, right? We've arrived at the feet of the mother. We've sought the blessing of her beloved son Ganesha to come face to face with her. We've gone through an inner battle in the Devi Mahatmayam. We've met the Navadurgas. We've explored Tantra throughout the feminine life cycle. There's just so much richness, so much fullness. And finally, hopefully, with her grace, we arrive into a place of silence and stillness and deep peace. And we have a wonderful guest today who's going to share her wisdom on arriving in this place, a place that we so often in the modern world avoid like the plague, and yet a place that is so undeniably necessary. And so I would love to introduce my dear friend, Arpita. And I know Arpita from years back. Her and her partner, Arjuna, ran an ashram/retreat center on Lago Atitlan in Guatemala called Mahadevi Ashram. And I had the immense grace to hold 2 of my first ever retreats at this space, and was so lovingly held by Arpita and Arjuna, and was just so inspired by what they had created there, this kind of hybrid. It was really like a hybrid between an ashram and a retreat center, right? So they had ongoing karma yoga happening, and Arpita's one of her big specialties is running dark retreats. So there was a darkness retreat on the property, and now they have since moved to a beautiful center in Tuscany, which I also had the honor of coming and sharing during one of their yoga teacher trainings. So it is just such a joy to have you here, Arpita. Thank you so much for being a part of this and coming here to share your wisdom on silence. And I'll let you introduce, share anything else about yourself that you would like to.
Thank you, darling. I love how we go way back and we've shared so many beautiful and kind of magical and mystical experiences. And then here we are again to now celebrate the Great Mother. What would I like to share about myself today? It is interesting in this context of the alchemy of silence. It is very difficult to articulate then from a personal selfhood perspective. Like, what would I like to say about myself? Who wants to say anything? And so I noticed this kind of like wave of just restfulness inside that I experience right now in this moment. And then, of course, there is the personal story around it, right? In this lifetime, we all have our personal stories that have kind of brought us to this moment here and now. And I guess my personal story starts with a great curiosity that I kind of fostered since my childhood. And also, I think my kind of family fostered as well for me throughout my childhood, and a great permission to commune and relate with the mystical, to really inquire into the sacred, and to really kind of like open these doors towards like what's there, what's on the other side, what happens when we lift the veil and we look under. Something that really comes very natural to children, or some children. And then the question really is, how does that then unfold and take shape in our life? And so in my case, it kind of took the shape of really steadily and gradually coming into formal practice since very early on. Like I remember my mother giving me, books and invitations into like shamanism and other different like pathways towards understanding reality. And then I kind of landed naturally and found kind of my home in traditional yoga tantra, and then later on in like traditional Buddhist Theravada practice. So that is kind of like in very, very brief, my kind of more formal journey, which really happens very early. So it's been now surprisingly too many years of practice, and it's really a lifetime that's really been centered and gravitating always around truth and what is essential, what is there when everything else is moved, what's left.
Mhm. Oh, that's so beautiful. I love, there's throughout all of these interviews, there's always the through line, and I feel like in the process of doing these interviews, I've realized like there are stages, because everyone here is a teacher at this point in their own right. And I kind of through this journey, I really articulated, I'm like, the path to becoming a teacher or just a practitioner, because not everyone becomes a teacher, but it always starts with that seeking, with that deeper inquiry, with that like, there's something else going on here beyond what meets the eye, beyond what society is telling me or providing me. And I love the way you described it as, because the veil is her, the veil is Maya, or the great illusion, and that peeking under the veil is just, that feels so accurate to me for what we're doing here, what we're doing in these systems of practice. And I also really relate, interestingly, with your family experience. For me, it was my father who was slipping me the books, but it also started at a very young age. And yeah, what a gift to have so many years of practice in one lifetime. It's really a precious thing. So thank you so much, Arpita, for sharing with us a little bit of how you ended up where you are today. And I'd love to just go ahead and dive into the deep end with you, into the realm of silence, into the alchemy of silence, and your experience of silent meditation, these longer retreats of being in silence. And yeah.
Yeah, it was quite curious to me when you reached out and you invited me on this summit. And I kind of tend to keep rather private with my practice and teaching. So I was like kind of inquiring with myself and my heart, would I like to join? And then if I do, then what topic would I like to speak about? And the alchemy of silence was the topic that kind of naturally came up for me and kind of instantly came up for me. And then I was kind of like wondering, oh my gosh, okay, it's, this kind of juicy Navaratri energy of like the great mother. And the topic that I want to speak about is like, alchemy of silence and stillness. And so it was very sweet when you've kind of acknowledged that and really had interest in speaking about this. Because it really is the core of my experience, kind of moving through so many kind of different practices and so many parts of the spectrum of also like traditional yoga tantra and also Buddhist practice that have led me into this alchemy of silence insight. And I remember when I set my first silent meditation retreat, I was 20 years old. It was Vipassana, so pretty hardcore meditation boot camp, 10 days. Most of us know how this goes. You get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, you meditate for 11 hours per day, and there is not much else to it. That's it. You eat food. And so, I went to this retreat. And I remember prior to this, I had met some incredible beings that were sitting silent meditation retreats. And this is happening like almost 20 years ago. So this was not very like prominent or trending in the culture. It was really like very small group of people back then doing these things comparing to now. And so I met these incredible shining beings that had really like alchemized something within themselves. And I was like, what are you doing? Because that's what I want to be doing. And so this particular person was like, well, I'm sitting these silent meditation retreats. And then I knew that that's the path I really want to dive into and explore further. And so as I set these first retreats, I still remember this moment. It was incredibly powerful moment where everything fell away. It was really a true kind of penetration through the layers of reality, the layers that like all the manifest is made of, and arriving at that incredible silence and stillness and emptiness ultimately. That is the end point of experience. Like within emptiness, there is no more either experience nor experiencer. So really arriving at that point and then eventually coming back and being so mesmerized and so kind of drenched in that unfathomable thing that had just happened, that it made no sense for me to do anything else with my life from then on. This was it. Like there was no like even a question mark. That's why I sometimes say, I'm so sorry, there were no dramatic turns. I mean, there were later on in my life, there were dramatic turns, but the different people have different stories about how they came to the practice and the spiritual seeking and path. The dramatic turns, you just let's do this. And really just touching this like impeccable silence within that was mirrored by this kind of greater cosmic silence and emptiness that is the background of everything, of all movement, of all that is manifested, of all form, was really a completely transformative experience. Was one of the experiences that really kind of shifted my life and kind of placed me undeniably where I had to be. And so from that moment on, there was such deep trust in that silence. There was such deep trust and restfulness in that stillness. And really the inner reassurance, understanding, and experience that this inner silence is always there. It's always available. And it is a gateway to that bigger, all-encompassing, cosmic silence.
It's so beautiful. Yes. Just as you speak, it's like I can touch that. Like your articulation is, it lands the space into that place, which is really special. And I think well, first of all, it's, so many of these paths of practice, I always giggle a little bit because some of these paths, in Tibetan Buddhism, in the kind of more classical tantric paths, so many of the practices are so complicated. Like there's so much going on, and it's just because, for a reason, because our minds are very unruly and they need things to focus on because they're everywhere, right? But to have that gift, like ultimately where we're trying to go with all the complicated, practices is exactly what you speak of. And so to me, listening to your story, I'm like, that is such a beautiful karma in this life to just, you were able to just go there. And that's special because it's not, I'm not ego fluffing here, but just to say as a fellow practitioner, like, it's not an easy place to go. And in our modern world where there's just so much noise from every direction, to be able to rest in that place is like, it's not a little thing. And so I think I just want to say that, because for those of you here joining us, we love the fullness of Shakti. We love the play and the Leela and all of, and the practices and her many faces and all of this, dynamism and complexity that is her. And yet she's also the silence. So she is, two of her main movements are, as that veil, are to both conceal consciousness, but also to reveal consciousness. And so it is her that, we kind of get lost in the fullness, the dynamism, the complexity, but it's also her grace that then says, but look here, but look here. And yeah, so it's so beautiful, and some of us need a little more of the complexity to get there. And some just have that nature that we can just land, and there we are. And yeah, it's really inspiring to me, Arpita, that, I feel you really hold that in such a beautiful way. You can feel the depth of that practice and the depth of that ability to be there. It's not an easy, the mind, maybe you can share a little bit about the mind, like how, I don't know what. I'm just like, well, how do we, so the mind is the mind. Like, how do we, what are some of the steps that, for those of us that struggle with touching that place? Do you have any advice?
The mind. Someone said the problem is the mind and the solution is also the mind. And I think we see this really beautifully in meditative practices, these really more traditional meditative practices, because that's kind of what we're doing there, right? We're like kind of like getting the mind to cultivate presence and concentration, and to be then able to enter stillness and wisdom. So it's really kind of this like collecting. And I think that's really kind of beautifully bridging to what you were saying. Yes, we live in the world. And yes, it's so full of experiences. And so meditation, or the alchemy of silence, is really kind of collecting all these experiences and then refining them, then like transforming them, letting them open us up into what is under, like what is underlying everything. And this is also what we do through ritual. Yes, in like traditional Tantra, we have like very, very complex rituals with very precise steps to be to be walked through. And then eventually, hopefully, there is that moment that is just everything drops away. The person who drops away, any preconceptions drop away. And there is then the capacity to really meet this present moment, to really meet this awareness exactly as it is. To, in this way, also meet ourselves and this body mind exactly as they are. And so it is an interesting topic for me, because also my life flows between both of those, fullness and emptiness, between kind of the color and juice and sparkles of Shakti Ma and life and, sex and ravishment and being open to every moment in its completeness. And also this silence and stillness that are always there. And so there is this kind of movement, but then it's really the dance of the opposites that come and merge together. And like in classical tantra, we have this understanding that, Shiva without Shakti is Shava, is a corpse. Like we kind of need both. We are in this body. So we have to acknowledge also the juice and the fullness and all that of this living in the world. And also to see, how can I master this? In a way, like how can I master the body mind? How can I cultivate the wisdom and clarity and discernment to really meet reality under the fluctuations of all the patterns of this mind? This is what silent meditation retreats help with ultimately. It's very hard to do this like on a day-to-day basis, living in the world, running a job, a family, and social relations and all this. It's very hard. It's like, wow, that is a strong practice. And so these moments of withdrawal, these moments of retreat, of really prolonged cultivation of awareness, of mindfulness, are very important, are crucial. They've been practiced for thousands of years for a reason, being that in a monastery, being that in a cave, being that wherever, but really just taking this moment to take a step back and just look and listen at what is happening when everything else is kind of removed. So then we can kind of dive back into the world. We can dive back into that fullness and really allow all experiences to create the tapestry of our life with awareness, with mindfulness, with full reverence as well.
What would you say is, we hear that term a lot, right? Mindfulness. What does it mean? What does it mean to be mindful in our, what comes to mind for me is this distinction between the habitual doer and then this being nature, but how do we carry the being nature into the doing?
By connecting with something that is deeper, that is under the habitualness with which we move around all the time, with which we interact all the time. That's why often when we say now mindfulness in the West, we often think like mindfulness of the breath, kind of one of probably the most famous practices. And if we take that one as an example, then yes, we are mindful of the breath. We connect with something that is there, that is present, and it's underlying, it's always there. No matter what fluctuations of the mind or emotions or experience happen. So mindfulness, in a way, it's like an anchor into the present moment, but that present moment changes. So then it's the next moment and the next moment and the next moment. So it is really growing our capacity to enter each moment afresh, anew, really with this open, engaged innocence. Oh, what is this moment like? Oh, what is that moment like? Oh, next moment is here. What's that like? Like to really come into a very intimate relationship with this present moment and our own experience in relation to it. Yeah. So at least for me, this is what cultivating mindfulness is. It's very intimate, actually. It's through the intimate connection with this breath, to the intimate relationship with this moment. And so, we like to put labels. The mind needs labels. Us, like academics, researchers, need labels. So we like to separate things like this is, this kind of Buddhism, this is that kind of Buddhism, this is this kind of Tantra, this is this kind of yoga, da, 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 da. But at the end, it often comes back to how can we most intimately meet this present moment? How can we most truthfully meet this present moment?
Yeah, I think about the dance as a human between, well, first of all, we're just in this realm where we experience life through a dualistic lens, right? There's pleasure, there's pain. I think back to my youth and, you know, sometimes just on accident, there was a lot of mindfulness because I was really into having these peak experiences, right? Where I was just like, I was so in the experience that I was like, I wasn't thinking about this or stressing about that. I was just in the exuberance and the joy and the, dancing at a show or whatever it was. So I think there's a way, and I also think just like very tangent, not where we're going today, but I think it's one of the reasons humans love sex so much, because it's in some ways, if you're having good sex, it stills the busy mind, right? These experiences of pleasure. So to me, I feel like I'll speak for myself. For me, the more challenging place to maintain mindfulness is actually in those difficult places in life where I want to dissociate, where I want to become reactive, where I want to kind of push back. It's like that energy of aversion, right? And I think that's potentially a fairly universal experience where it's easier to be in the think of the honeymoon phase of a relationship, right? One of the things we love about it is we're so present. We're just with that person and we don't want to be anywhere else. So we're just there and we feel so good. But then the relationship progresses, the personalities start to come in, the tug of war little things start, and we start to become more habitual in our interactions. So it's like, how do we in those moments remember to be present when we don't want to be? Like what's like a little tool or a little gem in those moments where we just
We cultivate that capacity as well.
Yeah.
To stay present with the unpleasant, to stay present with the unwanted, because this will happen. Like it's undeniable. Like it's undeniable in the human experience, unpleasant, unwanted things will happen. Suffering on whatever level, being that emotional, mental, physical, will happen. I think we can all agree. This is the reality of the human experience. And so that's exactly it. Like leaning onto that silence and that stillness, and then investigating, oh, okay, there is a pleasant experience. I want that. There is an unpleasant experience. I don't want that. How do we respond to that? How can we hold presence in both cases? What is this body mind reacting to when the game of pleasure and pain is playing out, and also how addicted this body mind is to the game of pleasure and pain? Oh, we're so addicted to our drama. Of course we are, because it's like me and it is my drama. Don't take it away from me. So I think a lot of us can relate to this experience, especially within the relational realm. It's like, oh, how can I self-validate this righteousness? Drama is one of the best ways to do that. So we're just going to keep feeding it because it keeps giving us that sense of like me and I and righteous identity. This is it. I think it also very much helps to, besides investigating this, to really honestly just be very, very raw and real with ourselves. And through cultivating practice, we actually develop the capacity to do that. But also it helps to approach it with a little lightness and a little humor and be like, oh, here I am again, playing the pleasure and pain game. Fun. All right. And this is really one of the first steps, the most important steps, to actually be able to, take just a little step back, to just disengage for a moment, to don't identify, just for a brief moment, and witness what's happening. It doesn't even need to be anything else. We don't need to even do anything bigger about this right now, but just to take a little step back and be like, oh, there we go again, fun. All right. And then with time, that changes. It changes much, much easier. We move through these different states of resistance or unwanted sensations and unpleasantness with way more stability, way more equanimity, way more evenness of the body-mind. If we're not addicted to our dramas, as long as we are addicted to our dramas, we just know, we can't do anything about this. Like, as much as we're like, I want more of this, pleasure and gain, then we got to play that out until,
Yeah, the addiction it's really, it's something, because it's wild. Like, I will fully admit, as a practitioner, sometimes I am so humbled, and I'm glad you brought in the humor, because we have to be humorous. Otherwise, what? We're self-deprecating, which isn't helpful, and it just perpetuates the cycles, right? But I have to admit, sometimes I'm just like, man, Halo, you've been a practitioner for so long, and I'll have, it's one thing when we don't have a choice. Sometimes we don't have a choice. We're just so in the drama, so identified. There's not even the awareness of, I could choose something else, right? Sometimes we're just so in it. This is the sneaky part. I've had moments where there's a choice, and I'll still, it's like you're at a water park in the slide, and you're just like, I could just not do it, but then you're just, I'm gonna do it.
You're literally just like, fuck it, we're gonna do this.
And it's so humbling on the other side, because you're like, yeah, I could have just not done this. But the addiction, the impulse is really what it is, to just, no, I'm gonna, the playing out of the pattern. And I think it's a really interesting, to me, I'm endlessly fascinated how we are so attached, not only to the good aspects of our personalities and the good things that, like, of course we have attachment to those things, but we're equally, and sometimes even more so, attached to the ways we limit ourselves, to the ways we suffer, to the ways, because it's familiar, because it, as exactly as you said, it feeds our sense of, I am this, or I am that, or I am a victim. Or that's actually a really great example, is like this attachment sometimes we have to being the victim, when if we could just let that shed, there's a new possibility there, right? So it's interesting to me, the ways we're attached to the ways that we suffer. It's just it's a very humbling place on the journey of the practitioner, because we start to become aware of these places.
Yeah.
So,
and that's why I think it is important to eventually, hopefully, be able to approach it with lightness, because if not, it's just a lot. It's just a lot to see ourselves responding in the same ways, even when we have a choice to choose the familiar, just because. And it is a big one. It is a big one. Of course we choose the familiar. It is still safer than the unknown. Well, what will happen if we respond in some completely new way? Oh, we don't know. With our usual patterns and responses, we kind of know, okay, I'm going to respond in that way, and then this is going to happen, because that is kind of the natural follow-up. We know already how this is going to end. But then if we respond in a completely new and fresh way, then we have no idea what's going to happen. And that can feel scarier than anything else. And this is the liberation and the freedom we talk about on the spiritual path. It is the freedom to actually, take this breath in between, enter that space of silence and stillness, even if it's for a second, and really attune to awareness, to presence that is underlying, you know, the dramas, the patterns, the addictions to identity and personhood and all that. To really, even if we manage to touch that space within us for a second, that's the liberation, that's the freedom of ultimately choice, the freedom of choice to respond differently, to meet, again, to meet this moment, this situation as it is.
Yeah, I think of freedom, you know, and we think of like samadhi or these enlightenment, you know, these are kind of like very lofty terms. And when we hear them, sometimes we're just like, I can't even, like, I don't know how I would ever touch that or if I will ever touch that. But I had like a awareness a while back where I was just like, you know, enlightenment is just, it's like becoming lighter. It's dropping all of our defenses, right? It's not actually this. So it's just there waiting for us. It's not somewhere we need to go. It's just we need to drop. And there's a intense vulnerability there. I think that's why we choose the known and familiar, because it involves us dropping our defenses to face those moments like that, right? There's a way that we have to accept suffering, right? We will suffer in this human life, no matter what. And we can either fight against that, or we can soften and allow that to just be part of what we're doing here. And then the vulnerability in those moments to choose the unknown, to drop the, you know, in my lineage, my teacher called it this, and I loved it. And I'm not sure if it came from her or her teacher, but she called it the elegant defense system. And I love that, because there is a way we have all crafted this elegant defense system, and we all yearn for love and connection and communion with all that is more than anything. And yet we fight against that very thing that we yearn for. It's so, the path of the practitioner is not for the faint of heart, because we can't just ignore in blissful ignorance about this. It's like we long for something, and yet we have to see all the ways that we stand in the way of ourselves actually experiencing that. Ouch. It's so much easier to point fingers, blame someone else, blame circumstances, than to say, oh. And then, of course, to have that play and that humor and that, like, I did it again. Oh, I want love and I'm pushing my partner away, you know, to just bring in a very human example. But yeah, I just think there's something so vulnerable about dropping that to really be able to be present.
Yeah, and something so vulnerable to actually see all our habitual patterns and responses. Oh, ouch, as you said, you know, to actually be aware of them. It's a lot. It's very humbling. And like, I love during silent meditation retreats, usually, you know, some people come, they kind of don't expect what they get themselves into, didn't read the description or, you know, whatever. They don't know. Arrive at the silent meditation retreat, and then in the silence, we are confronted with ourselves. Like, if we actually pay even a little bit of attention, we are confronted with all these pieces that are really, yeah, often we don't want to look at. And so then what comes next is what we call in silent meditation retreats, or at least I call, the dramatic escape, or the attempt for dramatic escape. This is when a person, usually we are in an 8-day or 5-day silent meditation retreat, and then on day 2 or 3 or 4, a person comes to me and they basically give me some kind of reason, which is completely outrageous, right? Why they really need to leave the retreat. They're like, Arpita, I really thought about it, I need to go. And then sometimes, most often, it's something like, I really have to go back home and have this conversation with my girlfriends. Or like, I really need to, like, you know, it's like some kind of reason that actually, it really doesn't add up. And so it usually takes about 2 sentences from my side, which are like, you know, I think you should stay. It's okay. And then the person's like, okay, then I should stay. But then there's this kind of like cycle of like attempts for dramatic escape until the end of the retreat comes and they're like, this was amazing. I'm like, my heart is gonna burst. I'm so glad I stayed. This was amazing. And I'm like, okay, we did this. We moved through. We, they deflected our attempts for dramatic escape. But the mind is very, very resistant to listen and to see what's happening.
And so convincing. So convincing.
So convincing. Oh my gosh. I honestly, sometimes I can't even hold it. I just giggle, I'm like, this is the reason, this is the reason this is not gonna happen.
Good for you. That's why we should all go to our Arpita's silent retreat boot camp. She won't let us. What did you call it? The
dramatic escape.
The dramatic escape. That is a huge gem right there, because that's something we can watch in ourselves. What's our attempt at dramatic escape? That is like, I'm going to adopt that one in my own life. Where do I attempt my dramatic escape?
Yeah, and it when we start watching it then becomes really obvious. Just in silent meditation retreats is even more obvious than usual, because there's not that much happening. We have really the opportunity to witness, and if we have the capacity to witness, then we can really laugh about it. Oh, there I go again, my attempt for dramatic escape. How did the mind concocted this? Belief or conviction or whatever it is. And of course, that's just a disclaimer. Of course, sometimes there are valid reasons to leave a retreat. And I always say meditation retreats are not for everyone, and one has to have a stable body mind for those. But often there is also a lot of dramatic escape attempts. And I've done that. I've been like, I need to leave a retreat right now and tell my mom how much I love her. She's given me this life and this is crucial. I must tell her now.
I think that's another, because there's a sense of urgency, right? Yeah. It's like, it's interesting how these, again, with the convincing mind, there will be this sense of urgency, like, oh, I had an insight and I have to do something with it. And it's like, well, no, you don't. You can just let it arise and fall, like it's in the body-mind system. It's interesting how a thought will create that visceral response in the body, like, oh, I need, and it's this like leaping up and out. Now I must go do this thing now. I have that all the time when I'm sitting in practice. And if I would never practice if I followed all those moments, right? I'm sitting, I'm meditating, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh, this thing on my to-do list. Oh, I can't forget. I should get up and write it down. I'll come back. But and then I'm just like, no, that's not what we're doing right now. And there is something to, this is something in psychotherapy also where if we're not at a silent meditation retreat with Arpita helping us to thwart our attempts at dramatic escape, there's a way we can do this for ourselves. And it is this kind of reparenting. Like we have to find that. I think of, the system of the koshas we think of in the yogic system. Like we have that higher wisdom mind, right? The Vijnanamaya kosha. We do have this higher mind that can come in and be like, oh, sweet child, it's okay. You actually don't need to do that right now. You can stay here, and so we can kind of talk ourselves off the cliff in our practice. But just, I think what's really good to know, especially for those of you who are newer to the path or you're about to step onto the path, is meditation is not just like sitting and so much of it is this like, just stay. This is what we're doing. Oh, that was a fun little ride we took for a minute, but now we're back here again. Like that's really more often what a meditation practice looks like.
Yeah, and I kind of really feel to bring this back to the alchemy of silence and stillness. because we are in celebration of Navaratri, and we have already moved through so many of the really like intense energetic movements that the great mother kind of spins us through her, you know, washing machine of the manifested. And then what is left? And then what happens when we move through all this shedding, through all these like inner battles? When we slay those demons, then what happens? When we arrive at her feet, what is left? Who is there? Who is offering herself in humble devotion? Of this body mind. As we move through these different layers, as we are willing to actually put ourselves through this process of really burning our way that's not serving, that's not necessary anymore, that's not useful or skillful, then what is left? And in my experience, when we arrive at those feet in humbleness, then there is only silence left.
I'm feeling the impulse. We just end in silence with that. We just all take a little bit of time in silence. Yeah. Would you like to guide us into that, or shall we just go there?
Maybe just a little orientation.
Yeah, that would be wonderful.
Closing the eyes gently. And taking a moment to truly arrive right here, right now. Taking a moment to arrive in this body. To arrive with this breath. Making sure the body is as relaxed as it can be. Noting even the slightest habitual tension and softening it, letting it go. Bringing the awareness to the breath. We simply start noticing the air moving in and out of this body. Letting go of any need to change anything. Letting go of any need to control the breath in any way. Or to control the experience in any way. And simply noticing how with each and every breath we cultivate a more intimate, a more direct experience and relationship with this moment. With the reality as it is. And simply coming to rest right there awareness that are always there, always available. And remaining fully present with your direct experience right here, right now. And taking a deeper breath. And slowly coming out.
Mm.
Just a little nibble.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much, Arpita. That was just a wonderful, wonderful conversation. And yeah, it felt appropriate we end it like that. So thank you again. Thank you to all who have been here with us on day 8 of Navaratri. Tomorrow we're on the final day of Navaratri. So we'll see you tomorrow for day 9, and then we will all meet live for Vijaya Dashami, the victory day, on day 10. So thank you all for being here. I'll see you tomorrow for day 9.